In the early morning haze that clung to the stone alleys of GAOUA, the city stirred with uneasy silence. Shopkeepers delayed lifting their shutters. Children lingered at home longer than usual. Something was off. An unmarked convoy, painted in military drab but devoid of insignias, rolled through the main avenue without escort or announcement. 5 armored vehicles moved with calculated precision, their tinted windows hiding the eyes behind them. At the presidential compound in Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood by a wide window overlooking the courtyard, his jaw set, arms crossed. The report had just arrived. A clandestine network was reportedly operating within striking distance of the ministry in GAOUA. Not just near, it was allegedly embedded right across the street. He turned to Colonel Issoufou Diallo, the intelligence officer he trusted most. Diallo's face was tense, his fingers tightening around a worn leather folder. "You're certain of this?" Traoré asked. Diallo nodded. "The source is credible. Repeated encrypted transmissions, personnel movements, and recent unexplained disappearances. It all points to a covert cell. They've been operating under our noses for months." The captain narrowed his eyes, walking slowly across the room. "Why GAOUA? Why now? They're coordinating something, possibly recruiting, maybe even staging sabotage operations. And worst of all," Diallo hesitated, "it appears they may have sympathizers within the ministry." The words hung heavy in the air. "Mobilize Cobra unit," Traoré said firmly. "Keep it off the books. I want surveillance on the building across from the ministry within the hour. Quietly. I don't want panic." "Understood." As Diallo exited, Traoré turned back to the window. His country was a fragile balance of defiance and hope. He had taken power with the promise of rooting out corruption, restoring security, and facing down the chaos festering from within. But now, with this network embedded so close to the heart of governance, the promise was being tested. In GAOUA, as dusk approached, Sergeant Mamadou Sanogo adjusted his headset and scanned the perimeter through his binoculars. From a rooftop overlooking the suspected building, he watched as people came and went, some in plain clothes, some too careful with their steps. He noted 3 figures in particular. One carried a briefcase, another seemed to loiter, but only ever near the same entrance. The third appeared twice that day, both times speaking on a satellite phone. Sanogo transmitted updates to headquarters, his voice calm but alert. Across the city, in a small office lined with old books and paper files, journalist Awa Coulibaly examined an anonymous tip she had received the day before. "Activities in plain sight. Right by the ministry, protected by silence." It didn't make sense until now. She cross-checked dates, names, and places. A string of unexplained asset transfers, inconsistencies in building permits, and power grid blackouts all centered on the same area. Her fingers trembled slightly. If she was right, something big was festering in the heart of the city. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré stared at a map pinned with red markers. His hand rested on a single file. Operation Sentinelle. It had begun. If you're intrigued by this unfolding story, where loyalty, courage, and truth clash in the shadows of power, subscribe now to stay with us as we follow Captain Traoré and his team deeper into the hidden underworld threatening Burkina Faso. The real battle has only just begun. The first layer of deception peeled back more questions than answers. Colonel Diallo sat beneath the humming fluorescent lights of his operations room, combing through fresh intelligence reports. Names began to emerge, some familiar, some buried in minor bureaucratic roles. Phone records, cross-border communications, and financial discrepancies started forming a pattern. It wasn't just an isolated cell, it was a web. The unsettling part. Several connections pointed inward, into the ministry itself. A string of unusually fast security clearances had been issued over the past 6 months. Clerks and assistants were promoted without explanation. Shadow companies won public contracts despite zero background, all of it tied, however discreetly, to the building across the street in GAOUA. Diallo's voice cracked over the secure line. "Captain, the network has embedded itself within the ministry's administrative layer. Paper trails suggest coordination between internal staff and off-the-grid operatives. Traoré didn't flinch. We need proof. And if they're in the system, we can feed them misinformation. Already begun. While Diallo worked behind the veil of codes and satellites, Awa Coulibaly pushed further into her own investigation. Posing as a local contractor, she gained brief access to the city's public archive center. Inside, buried beneath maintenance blueprints, she discovered a request dated 4 years ago for telecom rewiring in the district. It listed Ministère des Services Stratégiques, a non-existent department. She stepped back, her breath catching. Someone had manufactured an entire entity to justify infrastructural changes that bypassed inspections, and it had gone unnoticed for years. Returning to her office, she reviewed her interview notes from former ministry staff. One in particular, a janitor dismissed last month, had mentioned night visitors arriving in black SUVs long after hours. He never saw faces, only that they entered from the rear service door and left before dawn. She had dismissed it then. Now it felt pivotal. Meanwhile, Sergeant Sanogo maintained his rooftop surveillance. Through a high-resolution lens, he tracked daily activity at the suspect building. Patterns solidified. 2 men always arriving at precisely 8:47 a.m., never speaking to anyone else, always carrying large portfolios. Another figure often left just before sunset, carrying what looked like signal equipment. But the real breakthrough came unexpectedly. A courier entered the building carrying a sealed envelope marked with the ministry's insignia. 35 minutes later, the same courier exited, heading straight into the ministry building across the street. Sanogo immediately reported, confirmed physical link, inter-building communication established via diplomatic channel. Possibility of state-level collusion. Within minutes, Diallo authorized deeper digital access. Firewalls were breached. An encrypted messaging app used by ministry staff synced to an unknown server located in the exact coordinates of the GAOUA address. Evidence was mounting, but so was the danger. A coded message intercepted that evening hinted at cleanup operations. Diallo grew uneasy. They know something. Our window is closing. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré gathered his senior advisors. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. His words were few but firm. We're not just chasing ghosts. We're exposing a network that believes itself untouchable. The moral weight pressed heavily on his shoulders. Going public now could cause unrest, possibly even revolt. Yet remaining silent allowed the cancer to grow. In GAOUA, Awa typed furiously. Her article draft read, "Shadow Ministry, the secrets hidden across the street." She hadn't published it yet, but she would. As night fell, the lights in the building across from the ministry dimmed one by one. Inside, plans were shifting, and outside the watchers waited. The night brought a different kind of silence. One that held its breath, waiting for the first crack. Inside the intelligence war room, Colonel Diallo laid out the final plan. "We bait them," he said. "We force a move. Controlled. Contained. Then we close in." Captain Traoré approved the operation with a single nod. No signatures, no public orders. Everything would unfold in the shadows. The plan required deception. Awa Coulibaly agreed to play a crucial role. She would publish a carefully worded article, enough truth to stir interest, enough ambiguity to trigger panic. The title, "Are Foreign Interests Buying Influence in the Ministry?" A trap disguised as journalism. Awa knew the risks. If the network believed they'd been exposed, they'd try to bury the evidence or flee. Either reaction would expose new weaknesses. Her fingers hovered over the publish button. Then, with a breath, she pressed. Within hours, controlled leaks of information reached anonymous online forums frequented by intelligence operatives and ex-military agents. The bait had been cast. Sergeant Sanogo, now operating under the alias Dembele, posed as a former radio technician with a history of anti-government rhetoric. His profile was fabricated, but convincing. Through a contact planted by Diallo, he was introduced to an associate of the cell. They met in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of GAOUA. The man asked few questions, but demanded proof of loyalty. Sanogo provided technical blueprints, harmless, doctored designs of government infrastructure. The man seemed satisfied. Over the next 2 days, Sanogo was brought closer. He met more members. They discussed surveillance evasion, asset transport, signal relays. He noted faces, names, routines. His recorder ran constantly. By day 4, he had access to a secondary site, a basement communication center with encrypted equipment. "This is where it lives," he transmitted to Diallo. "All the data, messages, the whole web." Meanwhile, the reaction to GAOUA's article was swift and varied. The ministry issued a public denial, but internally, whispers grew louder. 2 staffers requested reassignment. One assistant suddenly disappeared. Diallo noticed something stranger, an unusual increase in classified data access from one terminal. The user, Alassane Ouattara, Deputy Coordinator for Logistics, a man with no clearance for strategic files. Traoré was briefed immediately. "He's not just helping them," Diallo said. "He's guiding them." "No arrests," Traoré ordered. "We let him run a little longer. He'll lead us further in." But tension escalated. A message intercepted the next morning read, "Initiate fallback protocol. Archive relocation in 48 hours." The operations window was closing fast. That night, Sanogo was instructed to assist in transferring servers from the GAOUA site to a location not yet disclosed. He agreed, but also planted a tracking device inside one of the cases. At the same time, a new problem emerged. A leak. Someone had informed the network that security forces might be watching. The leak hadn't come from GAOUA. It had come from Ouagadougou. Diallo's team scrambled to contain the breach. Communications went dark. The operation teetered. "We proceed anyway," Traoré declared. "They won't expect us to move under threat." That's when we're strongest. But just as they prepared to launch the final phase, Sanogo sent a new message, voice tense. "We have a problem. One of ours is working for them. I've seen him inside." The text came with a single image, blurred, taken from behind. But Diallo recognized the posture instantly. An ally wasn't who they claimed to be. The mission was no longer about exposure. It was survival. Colonel Diallo stared at the image Sanogo had sent. It wasn't the face, but the posture, the way the figure carried himself, the tilt of the shoulders, the stance of someone accustomed to command. He turned to Captain Traoré, his voice grim. "It's Ouattara, I'd bet my commission." Traoré didn't blink. "Then we finish this." The Cobra unit was deployed under full blackout orders. No uniforms, no insignias. The plan was swift. Simultaneous infiltration of the GAOUA site and containment of internal suspects in Ouagadougou. Time was running out. Once the data was moved, the trail would vanish. As dawn crept over GAOUA, Sergeant Sanogo remained embedded, acting as liaison for the supposed relocation. Inside the basement hub, tension rose. The operatives were on edge. 2 of them argued about the route. One wanted to accelerate the move. Another whispered about burning the files. Then came the signal. 2 short buzzes on Sanogo's earpiece. He gave the phrase they'd rehearsed. "We'll need extra shielding if we're crossing district lines." At that moment, Cobra agents stormed in through 3 separate entrances. Within seconds, the basement was under control. No shots fired, no alarms. Clean. Sanogo stood silently as his comrades secured the suspects. His cover was intact, but it didn't matter now. The operation had peaked. All eyes turned to the servers. Meanwhile, in the capital, Diallo and his team intercepted Ouattara in his office. The man didn't resist. Instead, he smiled. "You're late," he said quietly. "It's already beyond your reach." Traoré entered moments later. He placed a dossier on the desk, dozens of records, financial trails, intercepted messages, and photographs. Everything tied back to Ouattara. "You didn't just help them," Traoré said. "You built the network." Ouattara remained calm. "And what will you tell the people? That their own government fostered betrayal?" "That under your reign the house rotted from within." "I'll tell them the truth," Traoré replied, "because we clean the house by turning on the lights." By midday, the story broke. Awa Coulibaly published the full exposé. The network in the walls, how corruption crossed our streets. Names, roles, timelines, all detailed. Public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded. Protesters gathered peacefully outside government buildings, demanding reform. But there was no chaos, only clarity. That evening, Traoré addressed the nation live. "We have uncovered and dismantled a clandestine operation that sought to undermine our sovereignty," he said. "We acted decisively, we acted for you." His words were firm, his tone unwavering. He did not blame predecessors. He did not shield his own cabinet. He called for transparency, for vigilance, for unity. "The real war," he said, "is not always fought with bullets. It's fought with truth." At the same time, Sergeant Sanogo received commendation for his bravery and operational excellence. His identity was kept confidential to protect future missions, but within his unit, his name was already legend. GAOUA's courage resonated too. Her article wasn't just an exposé, it was a call to arms for accountability. Young journalists across the country cited her work as a turning point. In an era where silence had been safety, she had chosen noise. Colonel Diallo compiled the final report. 47 individuals were implicated, 17 arrested, 7 fled. The rest would face tribunal. But the system, for the first time in years, had responded, and the people had watched it happen. Still, in the quiet aftermath, questions lingered. What had the network truly intended? And had they acted alone? Weeks passed since the dismantling of the network, but the echoes of its exposure still rippled through every corridor of power. Captain Ibrahim Traoré moved quickly, knowing that public trust was fragile. Transparency was no longer a campaign promise, it was an imperative. He ordered a full audit of ministry procedures. Independent oversight committees were established, staffed with civilians and retired judges. For the first time in years, internal policy reviews were made public, and citizens were invited to contribute recommendations. The reforms were sweeping. All government contracts issued in the past 3 years were reopened for scrutiny. A whistleblower protection program was launched, granting amnesty and anonymity to informants with verified evidence. Even Traoré's own office was not exempt. He stood before the press and allowed live questions. No filters, no rehearsals. "It's not just about rooting out betrayal," he told the nation. "It's about rebuilding the kind of state where betrayal finds no place to hide." In GAOUA, the former safe house was sealed and converted into a memorial archive. Its underground servers, once used to manipulate, now stored a digital timeline of the investigation, accessible to all. Students came on field trips, veterans visited in silence. Awa Coulibaly, once just a local reporter, became a national symbol of truth. Her story ran in major international outlets. When asked why she took the risk, her answer was simple: because silence in times of deception is complicity. She received a presidential medal, but it wasn't the honor that mattered. It was the shift she witnessed. Young journalists began following trails, questioning power, cross-referencing public records. Investigative journalism had gained a new heartbeat in Burkina Faso. Sergeant Mamadou Sanogo was quietly promoted. The file labeled Dembélé was retired, replaced by commendations in his real name. He declined interviews. "I did my job," he said. But those who served beside him knew better. He had risked everything, not for recognition, but because the mission mattered. Colonel Diallo, though aged by the months of tension, smiled more easily now. He knew they had scored a victory, but also that this wasn't the end. "The shadows don't disappear," he said. "They just find new corners. That's why we stay ready." The people responded. Community forums flourished. Participation in local councils surged. There was still fear, of course, but also a new kind of courage. The courage to ask, to challenge, to demand better. As spring arrived, Traoré stood again before the nation. "This is not a conclusion, it's a beginning. The days ahead will still bring hardship. But now we walk them together, with eyes open. Let no voice be silenced. Let no secret rule from the dark. This is our country, and we are its light." From a story that began with silent whispers in GAOUA, a movement had grown, not just political, not just strategic, but human, rooted in vigilance, nurtured by bravery, and protected by truth. Thank you for staying with us through this journey, through danger, revelation, and the rise of something stronger than fear: integrity. If you haven't yet, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the stories that still need to be told, because they are coming. And before you go, click the suggested video on screen to continue exploring real stories of resistance, courage, and justice in today's world.